The snow falls softly on London, blanketing the crooked rooftops and narrow alleys in silence. Gas lamps shimmer faintly through the haze, their glow diffused by the cold mist that rises from the Thames. The streets smell faintly of coal smoke and chestnuts, of damp wool and chimney soot. Yet somewhere, beneath the noise of the carriages and the sigh of the wind, a quieter sound begins to stir, a turning of the heart, an awakening of conscience. It is the year 1843. Charles Dickens, a man with eyes as sharp as his pen, walks quickly through the streets of the city that will forever be his muse. He has seen its contrasts more clearly than anyone else. The comfort of drawing rooms where laughter warms the air, and the misery of tenements where children sleep cold and hungry. He is haunted by the question of what it means to be human in a world ruled by progress and profit. And so, that winter, he writes a story. The manuscript is small, just over 100 pages, written in feverish bursts of inspiration. It tells of an old miser named Ebenezer Scrooge, a man whose heart, like the city around him, has grown cold. It tells of ghosts who show him his past, his present, and the shadows of what might be. But most of all, it tells of redemption, of how even the hardest spirit can thaw when touched by compassion. When A Christmas Carol is published that December, it captures something the world had forgotten. Not wealth, nor power, nor spectacle, but kindness. Within days, readers speak of it as though it were a miracle. Factory owners, struck by guilt, close their shops for the day. Clerks receive bonuses. Families who have not prayed in years gather for dinner and raise a quiet toast to Tiny Tim. Newspapers praise it as a story to awaken sleeping hearts. And even those who could not afford the book share it aloud in pubs and workshops, its message carried like a carol through the city's fog. It is difficult to imagine now how revolutionary that little tale was. Before Dickens, Christmas was not the grand, sentimental holiday we know today. It was a day of modest observance, church, perhaps a meal, then back to work. But A Christmas Carol changed that. It redefined Christmas as a time for generosity, for forgiveness, for looking beyond one's own comfort. Scrooge's transformation became a symbol of what the whole nation longed for, a softening of the world's hard edges. The Industrial Revolution had filled cities with noise, smoke, and ceaseless labor. The poor crowded into damp cellars. The rich built high walls to keep them out of sight. Dickens tore down those walls with words. He reminded readers that every soul, rich or poor, was part of the same human story. And in doing so, he gave Christmas back its heart. Dickens never imagined his tale would create a new kind of holiday. Yet it did. A Christmas Carol taught an industrial nation how to feel again. It gave language to emotions that had been buried under years of toil and progress. The Victorians began to see Christmas not only as a feast, but as a moral renewal, a moment when compassion might briefly triumph over greed. Charitable giving increased. Hospitals and orphanages received donations marked simply, "From a friend." Workhouses reported visitors bearing baskets of food. Even newspapers began to publish appeals for the poor during the holiday season. The spirit of Dickens's story had stepped out of fiction and into life. Even today, the story lingers like the glow of an ember. Every December, its words return in countless forms, on stage, in film, on television, in quiet readings by the fire. And though centuries have passed, its warmth has not faded. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Dickens' Christmas. Not the nostalgia, but the reminder that amid the noise of modern life, whatever age we live in, there is still room for gentleness, still time to care. In the end, A Christmas Carol was never only a ghost story. It was a love letter to the human spirit. And in its light, the Victorians found a new way to celebrate. They began to fill the season with music, laughter, and storytelling, small rituals that drew people together and made the long winter bearable. The written word had become a hearth of its own. Over time, Charles Dickens would write many more Christmas stories. Jingle Bells, The Firefly, The Ghost Man, each of which would become another small window into the quiet mysteries of winter. Each would touch a different corner of the human heart. The anxiety of the new year, the expectation of good, the fear of loss, the small joys of the dark days, yet none of his works would capture the world's imagination as much as A Christmas Carol. A story born out of a need to change not only literature, but the very nature of the holiday imagined London in the mid-19th century. A vast city that lives in several dimensions at once. There is the London of the rich, where crystal chandeliers twinkle in large drawing rooms and hot punch is served on silver trays. And there is the London of the poor, where in the damp darkness of the narrow streets people warm their hands by tiny fires, and the frozen steam above their mouths seems like smoke. There are streets that smell of fresh pastries, and there are those that smell of coal, swamp, and poverty. It was in this city that Dickens walked for hours, peering into the faces of passers-by, trying to understand what invisible burden they carry within themselves. The snowy streets of London looked different then. It was not light, airy snow that falls in large flakes. It was thick, damp, British snow that gathered on the roofs in heavy blankets, mixed with the smoke from factory chimneys, and formed a cold fog that hid the city in a silvery veil. Gas lamps fought against this haze, like little stars tied to black metal poles. Their light was weak but warm, and it created the feeling that even in this great, incomprehensible city, there was a place for the human heart. Candles flickered in the windows of the houses. The glass was covered with small drops of moisture, and the lights seemed to dance behind a thin curtain. Inside, someone was hanging garlands of winter greenery. Someone was cooking pudding. Someone was watching the logs crackling in the fireplace. It smelled of cinnamon, orange peel, roasted chestnuts, which were sold right on the streets. All this created an atmosphere that we today call Christmas. But then it was just beginning to take shape. And it was into this atmosphere that Dickens wove the story of Scrooge and his magical night. It became not just a fairy tale, it became a mirror people in his time saw themselves in it, their anxieties, their losses, their dreams. And everyone found something in it that touched a deep, almost painful part of the soul. But to understand why A Christmas Carol became so significant, you need to feel the London that lived in the writer's heart. The city gradually became a symbol of the holiday. When people thought of Christmas, they imagined not just Christmas trees or gifts. They saw something deeper. They saw snow-covered streets inviting them to take an evening walk, the flickering of candles in misted windows where families gather together, the smell of roasting chestnuts mixing with the smoke from fireplaces, and the tinkling of slender bells flying over the city like tiny silver arrows. These images became so recognizable that it was impossible to imagine Christmas without them. And what is more amazing is that they still exist in our imagination. Despite the fact that almost 200 years have passed, Dickens created a London that lived in reality and in a fairy tale at the same time. It was a harsh city full of poverty, cold, and overwork. People woke up before dawn, worked until dark, and fell asleep, barely touching the pillow. But at the same time, it was a city full of hope and light, as if winter itself was trying to say, even in the darkest night, you can find kindness. He showed that shadows always give way to light, if there is at least a drop of warmth in the heart, and that the simplest, completely invisible to the world, act of goodwill can change the course of life, not always loudly, not always noticeably, but always palpably. It was a call not only to believe in goodness, but also to responsibility for others. People who read Dickens suddenly saw before them not just a story, but an opportunity. An opportunity to change something small in their lives, to take a step towards their neighbor, to extend a hand to someone in need, and from this, not only others, but also themselves, became brighter over the years. A Christmas Carol has become a kind of symbol, not just of a work, but of Christmas itself. It has migrated from book pages to theater, radio, and cinema. It is quoted on postcards, posters, and Christmas messages. And every time we reread the story of Scrooge, we return to the same London. Foggy, cold, but full of quiet warmth. Imagine an evening in this city. Somewhere in the port, ropes that hold ships are rattling. Somewhere far away on the bridge, someone is walking, leaving footprints in the fresh snow. In homes, people are reading aloud, and candlelight slowly spreads along the walls, creating shadows that look like ghosts from a magical story. Someone raises a glass of mulled cider and quietly says, "Merry Christmas." And these words, simple and familiar, suddenly take on a meaning that is almost physically felt, like a blanket of warmth on a winter's day. And that's why, when people thought of Christmas, they saw Dickens' London. Not the modern one, not the one crowded with cars, not the one that blares and shines with electric lights, but the old, foggy Christmas London that lives in the memory of generations. A city where the fog glides between the street lights like a fairy tale beast. The snow turns silver on the roofs, the windows glow with warm lights, and people's hearts become kinder simply because it's winter on the calendar. A city where even the darkest corner can suddenly be filled with light, if only someone smiles or extends a hand. A city where even a lonely old miser can find a way to change. A city where fairy tales do not oppose reality, but coexist with it. Just as light coexists with shadow, Dickens not only described this city, he gave it to us. He showed that Christmas is not about gifts, not luxury, not external brilliance. This is a moment when a person is allowed to stop and see the world as it is, in all its complexity, but also in all its beauty. This is the time of year when everyone, even complete strangers, becomes a little closer to each other. And now, when we think about Christmas, we often imagine that London, a city at once harsh and tender, real and fabulous, a world in which shadows give way to light, a world in which good has power, albeit small, but such that it can change the human heart. A world that was born one winter evening in the imagination of a writer who was walking along a snowy street and thinking about how to make this world a little better. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that London night again. The snow falls silently. The windows glow like lanterns in the fog. The faint echo of carolers singing, "God, rest in peace, gentlemen." And inside, a family gathered, their faces soft with warmth and delight. It is here that the spirit of Christmas truly began, not in palaces or cathedrals, but in hearts quietly awakened by history.